I'm not gonna lie, I was actually thinking about not doing the bracket. And, I know that this has kind of been a tradition for me to fill out the bracket before the playoffs begin. But what's interesting about this season's playoffs is that there is a lot of uncertainty that is going to happen. And in some ways, there's going to be some circumstances that can really change in terms of how we look at some of these matchup, and that unfortunately some of these circumstances are kind of luck based. I mean, one of the thing that is kind of like that is with the fact that we don't know exactly if all of these teams are going to get their players that were on international duty back ready for the first round. And we kind of already knew that, even though MLS basically said they're trying their best to provide charter flight for all these players that's on international duty to get back to their club to be ready in the first round. We already know that there's a couple of players that is not going to be the case, and unfortunately they're going to miss the first round. And then there's obviously the uncertainty of the fact that, with how COVID is being so widespread right now, there's no guarantee the fact that the lineup that currently teams are projecting for the starting 11 for their first round playoff game is going to be the same, because what if one of those players from the projected starting 11 get test positive of COVID-19? Then teams are going to, of course, have to scramble in terms of that. But I think probably the biggest concern in terms of this playoffs is that, are we actually even going to finish this playoffs? Are we going to have a situation where, I think this is the worst case scenario in this playoffs, where we're going to have a USL's situation where when we get to the final, there's going to be one team that unfortunately gets a COVID outbreak, and that, what are you going to do? Are you just going to do what MLS have already said that they're going to think about doing, which is, if there is a playoff team out of these 18 teams that have COVID outbreak, unfortunately they're going to have to force to kick them out of the playoffs. So does that mean that when we do get to MLS Cup and one of the finalists got COVID outbreak, and that they basically get automatically eliminated, and the champion will be the team that didn't get COVID outbreak? I mean, that's just feels completely unfair of how if that's going to be the case. But at the same time, that could also be a situation where they just say, well, we're just not going to even count this season anymore and just award no winner whatsoever, which I'm pretty sure that will also piss off a lot of MLS teams, because they work incredibly hard to get to that point and not have a championship that is going to take place, and pretty much have that to determine what's going to happen this season. Feel like every team just wasted their resources and energy to get to the ultimate stage, which is winning MLS Cup this season. But that being said, despite all that, I'm still going to do a bracket because of tradition-wise, and I won't be surprised if I'm going to get a lot of these wrong. I mean, before, I already are not very good in terms of doing the bracket and making some of these predictions, but this year, with how uncertainty the circumstances is, I have a feeling I'll probably get a lot of these wrong, and I won't be surprised my bracket is going to be bust before we even get into the first round matchup in the next midweek games, because some of those games that I predict in the first round are probably going to be the wrong prediction. But that being said, after my 3.5 minute spiel, let's actually get into the bracket. And for those of you that don't know, in terms of the playoffs, MLS, of course, will go with a single elimination game, and that basically the matchup in the Western Conference is going to be Sporting KC versus the San Jose Earthquakes, Minnesota United versus Colorado Rapids, Portland versus FC Dallas, Seattle Sounders versus LAFC. In the Eastern Conference, we have Philadelphia that is going to be playing the winner of the lowest seed in the play-in round, which is Nashville versus Miami. Then you got Orlando City versus NYCFC, Columbus versus the Red Bulls, and then you got Toronto playing the winner of the highest seed in the play-in round, which could be either New England or Montreal in that round. So we start off in the Western Conference first, and the first matchup is going to be SKC versus the San Jose Earthquakes. And you know what? I'm actually going to go with the upset. I'm going to say the Quakes are going to win this one, and I know some people will say I'm being biased because I am a Quakes fan, and say that they of course will win it. Just kind of shows my bias, but there's legitimately a reason why I think the Quakes could do it. One of the things that I always said about SKC is the fact that, without Polito in their team, what's going to happen with this attack of SKC? And we've seen before when they don't have Polito and their main striker in this attacking force, their attack is definitely weaker than before. And then you also have the question of the fact that this is really one of the first pressure cooking situation that SKC has been in for the past couple of games, because if you look at the past couple of games, they have been in situation where all they did is just play against easy opponent. And I understand that there is that kind of saying that you can only play against who you're face against, and in some way I also kind of believe in that. But it's also getting to a point when playoff time does come and you're no longer playing those cupcake kind of games. This is when it will really show whether or not if you're actually a contender or you're actually a pretender. And judging by the fact that there's been time SKC have shown that old habit of a team that finished 11th in the Western Conference last year, that just makes me think that I'm not so confident that the fact that they could be a team that coming into this playoffs that can potentially make a deep playoff run. And also for the Quakes, all I think about the Quakes, and really one of the main reason why I think they could beat SKC, is that as long as they show the good version of the Quakes. The Quakes have been one of the most unpredictable team, and I'm just praying to God that this is not the bad version of the Quakes that's going to show up, because if this is the bad version of the Quakes, then yeah, SKC will easily win this one. But if this is a good version of the Quakes, if this is a team that of course beat LAFC and also beat the Galaxy twice, and also beat LAFC twice too, then I think they can definitely move on into the next round and cause really the first upset that I'm going to pick in terms of the bracket. Now, in the very next matchup, we got Minnesota versus Colorado, and I'm going to say the Rapids is going to move on, which kind of is not just an example to show that I'm actually not being biased in terms of this bracket. But really, I think the Rapids could potentially move on, mainly because I am still very concerned about the Loons in terms of their injuries and international duty situation. Like, I haven't heard anything about whether or not if Jan Gregush and Robin Laird is part of the beneficial of being on that charter flight back to Minnesota, and that they're going to be available for the first round. We also don't know about the injury situation, whether or not if Ozzy Alonso or Hassani Dotson is going to be back, or even we might finally get a chance to see Iko Para play for the very first time. And I know for a fact that when you factor the injury concern and the unavailability of our starter players that is on international duty, this is a very weak kind of team. And I would say this is one of the weakest team in the playoffs. They don't have some of their star players, and now they have to play against a red hot Colorado team that I said before, they are the darkest horse in this playoffs, and that this is a team that I can definitely see them go very far into the playoffs, because they have much fresher leg, and they definitely are riding on a hot streak coming into the playoffs, and have already shown that they can definitely go on the road and take on some of the toughest opponent. Yeah, I think the Rapids does have a really good shot in terms of winning this. And I know the last time they of course went to Minnesota, they lost 2-1 in that game, but that was a game where they really gone toe-to-toe with the Loons, and that if it wasn't for an unlucky own goal that happened in the 85th minute, Colorado probably would have got a point out of that game. And I have no doubt that this Colorado team is not the same Colorado team that Minnesota faced in the regular season, and in many ways it's a much stronger Colorado team that we faced back a couple of weeks ago when we were able to win 2-1. So I'm going to say the Rapids are going to move on into the next round. But then moving on into the lower part of the bracket, we got Portland versus FC Dallas, and I'm going to say the Timbers is going to win this one. This is actually a rematch of the 2017 first round playoff matchup, where I think I remember in that matchup I predicted that Dallas of course was going to win this game, because I really believe that Dallas was kind of the better team over Portland, and since the Timbers were really struggling on the road, I thought I was going to basically think that Dallas is going to win that one, even though that was also one that I think I remember saying that it was very tough to try to basically predict who exactly is going to win this one. And I'm really hoping I'm not going to make the same mistake again, because we're kind of once again in this similar dilemma where it is kind of tough to predict who is going to win this one, and that even though Dallas have really struggled this season on the road, if they can get things going, they could potentially upset the Portland Timbers, where we've seen the Timbers have dropped points at home this season, and have at times have struggled at Providence Park this season. And that if this Timbers team, as long as if they can of course play to their ability, and that they don't have those situations where they give up late goals that they have been doing throughout the season, I think the Timbers should be able to move on against a Dallas team that, again, even though I said that they can definitely create an upset if they can show that at times they could be a very decent MLS team, I'm also kind of worried about the fact that on the road this season, at least for the majority of the time, they have looked very poor and look like a team that doesn't belong in the playoffs whenever they play on the road. Now, moving on into the next one is none other than probably the most looking for matchup in the playoffs, at least in the first round. And that, of course, is the rematch of the Western Conference Final between Seattle versus LAFC. And I believe this is like the 5th time that they have faced against each other. I mean, I know this is kind of a matchup that a lot of people are looking forward to because of what happened with last year's Western Conference Final, but man, oh man, they seems like they're playing every single week with the way that they've been meeting each other, like I think like 3 or 4 times during the regular season. They also met each other in the round of 16 of the MLS's back tournament, and it's basically deja vu all over again that they're meeting once again in the round of 16 of the MLS playoffs. Now, as I said before, how I mentioned how there's not going to be guaranteed that every single player is going to be back with their club, despite the fact that MLS is using their charter flight. Well, this is the case for both of these teams, because we know that for LAFC, they're not going to have Diego Rossi for that game. They might potentially not have Jose Cifuentes and Diego Palacio ready for this game, because I heard both of them are also having trouble trying to get back to the U.S. and available for LAFC in the first round. And for Seattle, there's definitely question about whether or not if Ruidíaz would be one of those players that can be back in this team before this game, of course, kicks off. And then, of course, I've heard the fact that Arriaga and Gustav Svensson most likely will not be available in this game. So this could be a very short-handed kind of matchup between both of these teams, and that, that kind of just makes it even tougher. The fact that, if you have like both team that's going to be very short-handed, who exactly do you think is going to be the team that is going to move on into the next round, despite the fact that they are very short-handed? And you know what? I'm going to say LAFC is that team. And, I think the only thing that I would say LAFC could win this one, and that Seattle potentially might not able to get the victory in this one, is the fact that if Ruidíaz is not going to be available for them. If Ruidíaz is available for Seattle, no doubt I think the Sounders are going to be the favorites and potentially win against LAFC. But I'm just going to say that maybe in this situation, Ruidíaz is not available, and then you also got a couple of other players that's not available in this team. Plus, against an LAFC team that, yes, they don't have Rossi there, but they potentially is going to have Vela and BWP into this team, and I think that's still enough attacking power to potentially get this team over the line. And we already seen before where a short-handed LAFC team in the regular season against Seattle is able to beat them 3-1, albeit that game was kind of at home, and that in some way you could maybe say LAFC kind of got a little bit lucky with the way that Seattle wasn't having a good day in terms of in front of goal. But I really think for this game, if this is going to be a game that is between two teams that is going to be short-handed, I give the edge over LAFC on this one. But yeah, moving on in terms of now looking at the semifinal and who exactly, or the quarterfinal, and who exactly is moving on into the semifinal. We got the Quakes versus Colorado, and this is kind of a really tough one too, because I know the fact that the Quakes of course have decent record against Colorado, but the problem is they have decent record against Colorado when they are playing at home. But when they're playing away against the Rapids, as they will potentially do in this matchup, I have to give the Rapids the edge on this one. And I know the Quakes will, if this is going to be a matchup, the Quakes are going to try to redeem themselves and want revenge for what happened in that 5-0 demolition back in September. And that really was the game that kind of changed everything for the Quakes. Like, that was the game where the Quakes were kind of in rock bottom this season. But then after that, they started to kind of go on a great second half run and got themselves into the playoffs. So they're hoping that this is kind of a game that maybe they can, of course, continue that good run, and also, again, looking for some revenge against the Rapids. But I just don't see it happening because of the fact that I've seen before many times when the Quakes play against the Rapids, Dick's Sporting Goods Park, you talk about a house of horror. I always mention the house of horror for the Quakes is always going to be Providence Park, but Dick's Sporting Goods Park is another stadium. It's kind of a house of horror where it's been a long time since the Quakes have been able to beat the Colorado Rapids there. Definitely not since the last 4 years, because I think the last 4 seasons I haven't even seen the Quakes able to go to Colorado and able to get a victory on that. And that's when the Quakes were a very decent team and the Rapids were just a team that was struggling, they still somehow aren't able to get a win there. So I'm going to give the edge for the Rapids in that matchup. But in this one, we got Portland versus LAFC, and I'm assuming by this time LAFC should be able to get most of their players back, and maybe Diego Rossi could be available in this game, and that LAFC would be in full strength against a Portland side that then they might have a matchup where they're not going to be as physically tough as they would in this Seattle versus LAFC game, because I feel like this is going to be a game that could get very, very physical. So because of that, I'm going to say Portland is going to move on into the next round, just because of the fact that, the other thing that you got to also factor in this playoffs is that since the playoffs is pretty much very fast in each of these rounds, it's like in every 3 days, it's going to be interesting to see who has the stamina in terms of getting into the final, and kind of it's almost like a fight for nutrition with the way that the playoffs are so fast, and there's also some unknown factors of what's going to happen with COVID, and whether or not it's going to hit one of these teams very hard. That could be another interesting factors to look at, but also I kind of don't want to put that in terms of a factor because that's just too unpredictable to predict. But yeah, I think Portland is going to win this one, and I think they're finally going to get that revenge over LAFC, where they had the chance to potentially beat LAFC. The last time I think was the one where they looked the most well. There was twice that they could potentially beat them, and that there have been times that they've been able to do so. I think the one at Providence Park when they were absolutely dominating against LAFC was perhaps the one that they're going to do it, but they couldn't do it because they gave up a late goal. And I'm just going to put in the factor that they probably won't give up a late goal in this instant and finally get that redemption and able to get into the next round. I mean, we've seen before where just because one team dominate the regular season series doesn't mean in the playoffs it's going to end in the same way. And in fact, there's more times or not when you have regular season matchup where one team dominates, the other team might actually potentially win in the playoffs and when it really matters. Now, looking at the Eastern Conference right now, I'll just finish with the Western Conference and predict who I think is going to be the representative for MLS Cup in the Western Conference. This is kind of interesting because both of these teams, I don't think when people predicted the bracket, a lot of people would say Colorado would be at this spot, and in some way, this is kind of pretty bold of a prediction I make, that the fact that the Rapids can potentially get into the semifinal. But again, I have my reason why they could get into the semifinal with the way that they're a much fresher team and a team that is coming red hot into the playoffs. And when you are red hot heading into the playoffs, those are the team that usually can get themselves deep into the playoffs. But for this one, I'm going to say Portland is going to win this one, and that I think in terms of talent-wise and in terms of experience, the Timbers have more experience than what the Rapids had, and that, you know, a lot of these players on this Rapids team weren't part of the 2016 Rapids team that also made it to the semifinal of the Western Conference, and that this is going to be kind of a new experience for them. But, you know, when we see teams that are kind of in unknown territory against a much experienced team, yeah, usually that much experienced team is going to win. And again, not also, if you look at talent wise, I think the Timbers have definitely much talent, more talent than what the Rapids does had, and therefore I think they are going to be the representative in terms of the Western Conference in MLS Cup. Now, looking at the Eastern Conference. Now, the Eastern Conference is kind of a little bit interesting because we also want to talk about the play-in games. And we start talking about the first play-in game between Nashville versus Inter Miami. And I think this is one that I kind of talked about a lot before, of the fact that I think this is going to be a matchup that Nashville is going to win, mainly because I think when you look at both of these teams and who is coming into the playoffs, the hottest team, it's of course going to be Nashville. And in some way, I am a little bit concerned about Miami in terms of the inconsistency that they had, and also the fact that they have struggled in terms of scoring goals against a Nashville team that don't allow a lot of goals. That could be a little bit of a problem for this Miami team. But that being said, Miami did get kind of a lifeline when they were able to get Pizarro available for this game. And, you know, if for Miami, what's interesting about their team is that they have some game changer kind of player on their team, and they have definitely a lot of these European superstar player that's been in this situation before in a knockout kind of competition, and they have been able to step up big in terms of scoring crucial goals. So that could play into an advantage for Miami in this game. But that being said, I'm still going to go with Nashville in this one, because again, this is a team that I think is a team that is one of those dark horse kind of team that I mentioned before. And if you want to talk about who is the team that is the most dark horse heading into the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, as I said, it's going to be Nashville. That I think that they are a team that can really surprise a lot of people, and therefore they're going to be moving on into the next round and playing Toronto in that first round. Now, in terms of the other playing game between New England versus Montreal, this one I think is a little bit tougher to predict compared to Nashville versus Miami, because there are definitely some advantage and disadvantage that both of these teams are going to be coming into this game. For New England, the advantage obviously is the fact that, you know, they definitely have, in terms of talent wise, have much more talent than what Montreal has, both on the defensive end and also on the attacking end. But the problem is, the disadvantage is that they're playing at home, which this season at home it's been a real struggle against the Montreal Impact. Whereas for not the Montreal Impact, but the New England Revolution, and we also don't know whether or not if that attack can actually be consistent and actually stepped up heading into this playing game. Whereas for Montreal, you know, the advantage coming into this game is the fact that New England does struggle on the road, or at home, they can potentially caught them a little bit surprised, and maybe some of their attacking player like Bojan can really stepped up in this game, and also Ramel Kyoto could actually step up and score a couple of goals for the Impact. But the disadvantage for the Impact, again, like I said, is the talent-wise, where if you want to look at talents between these teams, New England has the advantage in terms of that. And knowing the fact that New England has already beat Montreal earlier this season, and this was actually their their first of what would be only 2 wins that they had this season at home against the Montreal Impact, and the fact that New England also have a head coach that knows how to get it done in the playoffs. And I know for a fact that Bruce Arena wants to kind of turn the clock back and wants to show his experience in the playoffs. That's why I am going to say New England is going to move on in terms of this, and that I think they're going to be just have the advantage in terms of talent wise, and knowing the fact that they have done it before at home against Montreal, that they're going to be moving on into the next round against the Philadelphia Union. Now, speaking of that matchup between the Union and New England, now this is a matchup that is the rematch of Decision Day, where the Union, of course, won that game and able to lift the supporter show. And I know, again, as I said before, no two match is definitely the same, and usually regular season matchup doesn't really kind of determine whether or not if the team that won the regular season matchup is going to also do well in the playoffs. But I really think with the Union, as I said, they are definitely a team that is going to be an MLS Cup contender, and a team that you could also say they're kind of desperate in terms of making a deep run too, mainly because of how we know that they're going to lose one of their best player, Brendan Aronson, this offseason, and they could potentially lose another good player in Kai Wagner, and all these young stars that's been linking to Europe. They could really be fleeced this offseason in terms of talent wise. So they want to make sure they want to go one big deep run before sending their kids to make the jump to Europe. So that's why I think the Union is going to win this one over New England, who I think New England will give them a very good test. But I think in the end the Union should be able to get it because of talent wise, and that this season they have been unbeatable at home this season with a perfect 9 out of 9 in terms of getting 9 wins at the Pulse Bowl of 9 games this season at home. Now, the next one between Orlando versus NYCFC, this is definitely going to be a tricky one because, yeah, both of these teams are definitely good, very good team, and that, you have one team in Orlando City as a team that has done very well this season at home, but then you also got an NYCFC team that have been coming into the playoff red hot and looking to kind of shake off that past bad memories of them always kind of fall apart when playoff time actually will happen. So yeah, this is kind of a really tough one, but I'm just gonna say NYCFC will get this. And again, I'll say NYCFC win this because they have the playoff experience compared to Orlando City, and I know Orlando, they do have some playoff experience with them getting all the way to the final of the MLS's back tournament, but in terms of actual playoff kind of experience, and if you want to look at the total playoff experience, I think NYCFC definitely have much more than Orlando City has, and that, again, this is, again, it could definitely go either way when looking at both of this matchup, and I won't be surprised if Orlando is going to get the victory out of that. But I'm just, in terms of these kind of matchup where there's not a lot to kind of decide who's going to win it, I'm just going to just look at the slightest advantage, which is kind of experience, and I'll give that edge over NYCFC and predict them to move on into the next round. Now, in the very next match, we got Columbus versus the New York Red Bulls, and I'm going to go with Columbus in this game, although I won't say that this is going to be an easy one for Columbus, because this is kind of a very familiar matchup for both of these teams, because it seemed like every single season when both of these are meeting in the playoffs, they tends to play against each other. And so far, in the past, I always said Columbus was the one that are going to win this matchup, despite the fact that the Red Bulls were favored in the past postseason matchup. But this time it's kind of the reverse, bro. This time it's Columbus the one that is the favorites against the Red Bulls. And the reason why I think Columbus will win this is kind of something similar to I said about the Union. They're another team that have a very good home record, and Montford Stadium is definitely a fortress this year, which will definitely help them. And also, so the fact that the Red Bulls this season, yes, they have shown times that they can definitely be a team that can go toe to toe against some of the best team in the league. But then there are times where they look like a very awful full team and look like a team that don't belong into the playoffs. So it's kind of, in some way, I would kind of say similar to what the Quakes is, where you don't know which version of the Red Bulls are going to get. Are you going to get the good version of the Red Bulls, or you're going to get the bad version of the Red Bulls? And if you get the bad version of the Red Bulls, then yeah, no doubt I think Columbus should be able to move on into the next round. Now, in terms of the last matchup that I'm going to talk about in the first round of the Eastern Conference, which is Toronto versus Nashville. And you know what? I'm going to go with the upset. And I'm going to say Nashville will only become the third team to ever make it to the quarterfinal and join a short list of teams like the Seattle Sounders and the Chicago Fire back in 1998 as the one that is an expansion team that make it into the quarterfinal. And the reason why, again, I think Nashville can really pull off the upset against Toronto is because of form, and also the fact that this matchup actually kind of favored Nashville. I mean, TFC is a team that, as I said, their form has been very bad down the stretch, and that goal scoring has been a real issue with this team. They only score more than one goal in the last 8 matches down the season, and when you struggle to score goals and you're facing against a team that don't give up a lot of goals, yeah, this could definitely be a huge issue for Toronto. And that, they're also another team that I've seen times when they have to play against a low block kind of team, which I'm assuming that is what Toronto is going to have to face against Nashville. They really struggle against that. So I think this matchup really favors Nashville, even though I know TFC does have the experience, and I've seen most of my prediction I made has really kind of just based on the fact that one of those team has the experience to get them the advantage. But I think the advantage coming into this one also is the fact that Nashville should be able to shut down this TFC attack that has really sputtered in the past couple of games. And the fact that, the only way maybe TFC could potentially win this one is the fact that if they can do something similar to what the 2018 Atlanta United team did, which is they kind of struggle as they were heading to the playoffs, and all of a sudden they find a spark and things kind of gets going into the playoffs. But other than that, because of the other reason of them struggling in terms of these teams that tends to put a low block on them, that's why I think Nashville is going to potentially win this game. Now, moving into the top part of the table, we got the Union versus NYCFC, and this is another one that is going to be tough to predict because, again, NYCFC is a team that is on a red hot streak. But the thing that I will give the Union advantage in this one is that, once again, they're playing at home, which they've been unstoppable this season at home. And the second advantage is that this is the farthest that NYCFC has got so far in their franchise history, and that, they, for whatever reason, they always have trouble in terms of getting into the second round. And I just think this matchup might not be one that they would like to see in terms of shaking off that demons of not getting into the second round, or getting past the second round, which is why I think the Union is going to win this one. And that, I think NYCFC will give the Union a really tough task, and probably even tougher task than what New England would give to the Union. But overall, I think the Union should be able to prevail NYCFC, where, when you have this problem of not getting past the second round for a very long time, it does kind of start to come into your heads. And that, I feel like in that game, if the Union are able to get an early goal in that one, that's going to come into the minds of those NYCFC players that it looks like it's here we go again with the way that we're going to get eliminated once again in the second round of the playoffs. Now, in the other quarterfinal matchup, we got Columbus versus Nashville. And as much as Nashville, I don't think during this playoffs, it's going to be be interesting to see how far they, of course, will make it into the playoffs. And I don't think a lot of people would predicted that they can make it to the quarterfinal. But yeah, I think the quarterfinal probably is as far as the Cinderella story is going to end. And I still think Columbus should be able to get the advantage out of this one. Again, playoff experience, Columbus definitely has the edge in this one. And the last time both of these teams played, Columbus was able to win 2-0 against Nashville. And Columbus, unlike Toronto, is a team that does have times figure out a way to try to break down a low block team. And also knowing the fact that the Columbus Crew is a team that is playing at home, which they have been unbeatable this season at home, then yeah, that's why I think that is another advantage over a Nashville team. That I think that if Nashville gets to the quarterfinal, I think their fans are going to be very happy, even if they get eliminated at that stage, because it is kind of, I'm really kind of putting a lot of bold predictions saying that Nashville can go really deep, and then if tomorrow's game between Nashville against Inter Miami and Miami ends up winning the game, yeah, I'm just going to be look like another person that makes some very bad prediction by putting Nashville that deep into the playoffs, where they basically just unfortunately stumble in the first block. Now, the very next match, which is the semifinal, and who do I think is going to represent the finalists in the Eastern Conference in the MLS Cup? I'm going to say it's the Union, because again, I think for the Union, I said before that they definitely have all the pieces in terms of making a deep playoff run, and definitely have all the pieces in terms of getting into MLS Cup. And knowing the fact that Columbus is a team that struggle whenever they play on the road, and it seemed like whenever Columbus does get into this stage in the semifinal, remember a couple of years ago when they played against TFC in the Eastern Conference semifinal, and that they kind of stumble at that block. This is always kind of a stumbling block for the Columbus Crew into this for semifinal, and that I think in the end, because of that, and also the fact that I think if you look at talent wise, the Union definitely have more talent than what the Columbus Crew does, and that the Union definitely wants some revenge after what happened in that other game where the Columbus Crew was able to win 2-1 against the Union, and that was a game where the Union probably should have won if they were a little bit better in terms of their finishing. I think the Union should be able to make it past Columbus and be representing the Eastern Conference in the MLS Cup. Which now bring us to this matchup between Portland versus the Philadelphia Union. Now, I am aware that of the last 10 years, only one Supporters Shield winner has ever lifted MLS Cup, and that also kind of just brings people to talk about how it seems like winning the Supporters Shield is kind of a curse, with the way that you usually don't win MLS Cup or even get into the final of MLS Cup. But in terms of this matchup, if both of these teams is going to face off against each other, I mean, the Union is going to get the home field advantage in this one against the Portland Timbers, but the Timbers have shown before that when they get into this stage, they could definitely win, and they will know that they already have done it before in a final this season in the MLS Pack tournament, winning that tournament in the final. But I'm just gonna say the Union is gonna win this, because again, I think since this season they have been so good at home, and that it just feels like the all the talent that they had this season that has been performing in sync, and the fact that, you know, this is a season that they know that as they head into the off season with kind of a lot of uncertainty of whether or not if they're going to keep some of their best player in their team, they're going to be definitely desperate in terms of winning MLS Cup. Now, that being said, that would kind of also be the same case with the Portland Timbers, where they're also a team that's desperate in terms of winning this MLS Cup, because they also have a bit of an aging kind of team with most of their core that is kind of right near the mid-30s, and in a couple of years we're definitely going to see kind of a transitional period that this Timbers team is going to get. But I think in the end the Union is probably going to be the one that is going to be more desperate. And if you want to look at talent-wise, even though both of these teams definitely have some decent talent, I think the Union overall, they're kind of a more well-rounded team, and that they would have just enough talent to able to get past the Portland Timbers in MLS Cup if this is going to be the matchup that is going to take place. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of the bracket that I filled out. It took me about 40 minutes to kind of did this because I kind of had to explain each of these matchups and kind of explain why I decided to pick each of these team. And again, as I said before, with so much uncertainty that's going to happen in the playoffs, I will not be surprised if I'm going to get most of these predictions wrong, and that my bracket is basically going to go bust before we even get past into the second round. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this, and let me know in the comments below your prediction in terms of who exactly is going to win MLS Cup. And if you actually have your own bracket filled out, let me know in the comments below, and kind of send a snapshot in terms of your bracket and how it looks compared to the bracket that I, of course, made. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.